Hi, I'm Daniel Negreanu, and welcome to the Stacked Poker School. We're now going to go over what you need to know about playing Texas Hold'em. I'm going to share with you some tips and secrets about some of the things I've learned over the years playing poker. First things first, we're going to be playing Texas Hold'em, which is definitely, without question, the most popular form of poker today. Now you can play Hold'em with 2 players all the way up to 22 players, but for stacked, it's going to be 9-player maximum for each table. Each player is dealt 2 cards face down. Then, 5 community cards are dealt out in the middle of the table. You use any combination of the 5 board cards and your 2 hole cards to make the best possible hand. But remember, this is Texas Hold'em. There are no wild cards, okay? Most of you are probably pretty familiar with the standard poker hands. You've heard of a full house, 4 of a kind, or even the royal flush. But many of you might not know how they stack up against each other. Well, let's start at the bottom. The lowest ranking hand would be high card, meaning ace high with no pair, maybe even king high. Of course, a queen high beats a jack high, king high beating a 10 high. The next rung up from there would be 1 pair. 2 cards of the same rank. For example, 2 9s beating 2 8s, 2 kings beating 2 7s maybe. The next highest ranking hand would be 2 pair. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that 2 pair beats 1 pair. An example of 2 pair would be, 10s and 4s, maybe kings and 3s. Now, if 2 players have 2 pair, the player that wins would be the one who has the highest ranking pair in their hand. So, kings and 4s would be queens and jacks, for example. Now, if 2 players both have the same kings in their hand, it would go down to the second pair. So, for example, let's say I had kings and 9s, but you had kings and 7s. Well, I win, because my 9s beat your 7s. Up from there, we've got 3 of a kind, and that's pretty straightforward. 3 of a kind is also known as trips or a set. 555, 777, 999. Obviously, the higher your trips, the better your hand. The next step up from 3 of a kind would be a straight, and a straight's pretty straightforward. Basically, it's any 5 cards in a row. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The highest possible straight is ace, king, queen, jack, 10. The lowest possible straight being ace, deuce, 3, 4, 5. Now, if 2 players have a straight, the player with the highest card in their hand would win. So if I had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and you had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, well, you lose again. The next step up from a straight would be a flush. And all that really means is 5 cards of the same suit. You could have a 3, 4, 7, 9, and a queen, and as long as they were the same suit, well, that's a flush. Now, if 2 players both had a flush, it would come down to the highest card in the hand. So, if my highest card was an ace and I had an ace high flush, but you just had a queen high flush, well, the ace high flush would win. The next step up from a flush would be a full house, which is any combination of 3 of a kind and a pair. Now, if you're really, really lucky, you'll get 4 of a kind, which is the next highest ranking hand. 4 9s would obviously beat 4 6s. Now, this next rank of hands, you're just not going to see very often. We're talking about the straight flush. Now, the straight flush combines both the straight and the flush, meaning you'd have to have 5 cards in a row and of the same suit. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all of clubs. A step up from there is the ultimate hand, the royal flush, which again, if you get, that's pretty lucky. 10, jack, queen, king, ace, all the same suit. Okay, so there we have the hand rankings. High card, a pair, 2 pair, 3 of a kind, a straight, a flush, full house, 4 of a kind, straight flush, and of course, the royal flush. In poker, the player has several actions or plays that they can use throughout the game. You can check, fold, call, bet, or raise. A check means you're still in the hand, but you're just choosing not to bet. A fold means that you're facing a bet and you don't want to put any more money in, so you throw your hand away. A call is a bet that matches an opponent's bet. A bet means that you want to put more money into the pot. A raise means that you're facing a bet but want to put even more money in the pot. Not all of the actions are available at any given time. For example, if you're facing a bet, well, you can't check. You'd have to call, raise, or fold. Blinds are essentially forced action from the two players to the left of the dealer button. They're blind because they have to put them in before they look at their hole cards. The first player to the left posts what's called the small blind, which is exactly half of what the big blind would be. The player 2 to the left posts the big blind. Each other player at the table has an option of calling, raising, or folding their hand. In Hold'em, we have 4 betting rounds. One before the flop, another one after the flop, a betting round on the turn, and finally, the last betting round on the river. Once the blinds have been posted and the cards have been dealt, the first round of betting begins. Once all the players have completed the betting, the dealer will deal out the flop. There's one more round of betting, then the dealer puts out the turn card. One more round of betting, and finally, the river card. At this point, after the betting's complete, everybody who's still in the hand turns their hand face up. Whoever has the best hand wins the pot. You want to be a real player? Well, you're going to have to learn the lingo. You'll often hear the term heads up or head up play get thrown around. And basically what that means is it's down to one-on-one action, mano y mano. Okay, it's time for the showdown. All the betting's done and it's time to show off the goods. There's nothing sweeter than being dealt the nuts. When you've got the nuts, there's no hand out there that can beat you. Now that's the stone cold nuts. It's pretty sweet when your opponents go on tilt. They give away their money and lose their cool. You don't want to be that guy going on tilt. There's nothing worse than drawing dead. Your opponent's got a monster hand, and there's not a card in the world that could save you. In Stacked, you'll be able to find both limit and no limit cash games. When you play cash games, it's all about the money. You can buy in for whatever you want, play as long as you want, and pretty much quit whenever you want. Tournament play. That's what you guys see on TV all the time. Basically, everyone starts with the same amount of chips. Once you lose all your chips, you're out of there. The tournament keeps going until one guy has them all. In Stacked, you can choose from single table tournaments or multi-table tournaments. In multi-table tournaments, you'll face off against hundreds of other players on your way to the final table. If you end up being one of the top finishers, you'll divide the prize money with the others. That's called making the money. In some tournaments, there's a feature called the rebuy. In a rebuy event, if you go broke, you have the option to buy back in during the rebuy period. Once the rebuy period is over, you'll have an opportunity to add on to your existing stack. In a tournament, the blinds continue to increase at scheduled intervals. As that happens, you no longer have the need for the smaller denomination chips. So what happens then is we do what's called coloring up, trading the small chips for bigger ones. If you happen to have any odd chips, well, that's when we do the high card race. Everybody always wants to know, how do you read your opponents? Well, reading your opponents isn't easy. It's both an art and a science. There's really two approaches, or two things you can combine to help you read opponents. The first thing being physical tells, looking for mannerisms and trying to pick up on maybe facial tics and things. But realistically, looking to see how somebody twists their cookie, that's not going to get it done. What's more reliable is to focus on your opponent's betting patterns, how they bet their hands, and past betting history. So while physical tells aren't the be-all, end-all of reading your opponents, there's still a few things that you should look for that'll really help you out in a key pot. For one, if you notice that a player's betting really aggressively, and all of a sudden his arm extends like that, like, I bet, well, chances are this guy's trying to scare you. He might be bluffing. Conversely, if you notice that a person's betting, I bet, you're real careful, well, he's inviting you in. He's like, come on in, I got you. Which leads me to the next example, and that's the sigh. If you notice a guy go like this when he sees an ace on the flop and says, chances are that's some bad acting right there. He loves that board and he's just trying to fake a tell. Which brings me to the last thing. Once you've coined and once you know that your opponent is using fake tells, look for stuff like that. If you see that he looks at the board and goes, you know what that means? That means he loves what he sees there. Once an actor, always an actor. Once a bad actor, always a sucker. You'll often hear people on TV say things like, I can see through his soul. Like, give me a break. No, you can't. The truth is, the great players are great. Why? Because they focus on betting patterns. They focus on the action, the pre-flop action, flop action. How does this person play these hands in certain positions? Does this person raise with a flush draw? Would this person ever just call with a big pair like aces or kings? The more questions you ask yourself and the more answers you get, the higher the likelihood that you're going to make the right decision in the long run. So again, to improve your hand reading skills, you need to combine both the art and the science, both the physical mannerisms as well as your opponent's betting patterns. You really just got to pay attention, watch your opponents. The more information you have, the better decisions you'll be able to make in those big crucial pots. There are different forms of betting structures in Hold'em. There's always 4 betting rounds, of course, but in Limit Hold'em, that betting is structured. For example, let's say you were playing $10 and $20 Hold'em. Before the flop, you'd have to bet and raise in increments of 10. After the flop, again, you'd have to bet or raise in increments of 10. Now on the turn, the bet doubles. Now you'd have to throw out 20 bucks or raise it to 40 bucks. On the river, once again, the increments are in $20 bets. It takes a lot of courage to play No Limit Hold'em. When it comes to the betting, pretty much are no rules. You can bet, raise, re-raise as many times as you like. Of course, you have to raise at least as much as the big blind, but if you think you got your opponent right where you want him, well then you could stick it all in. You know, back in the old days, if you didn't have enough money to call a bet, you'd have to just give it up. That means Moneybags over here would just keep robbing me all day. But today we play table stakes. So that means I can stick all my money in and he'd have to match it. If he raised me, I'm already all in. Any additional money goes into what's called the side pot. Of course, I can't win any of that, but I definitely get action on my money. The first thing we need to think about when playing Texas Hold'em are what hands we should play and what hands to throw away. In the next few sections, I'm going to get into specific detail about what hands you should play in what positions. Throughout the poker school, you're going to hear me throw around the term position quite a bit. Now there are 3 positions at the table: early, middle, and late. The first 3 seats are generally considered early position. Then we have middle position, and the button and the 2 seats directly to the right of the button would be considered late position. Well, the first group of hands that we're going to look at are big pairs and ace-king suited. Now obviously, you're going to play one of these hands in any one of the positions. But in early position, it's really important to make sure that you're raising to try to limit the field a little bit. You don't want to play 2 kings against 4 players. Now, moving on to middle position, if you've already had some action in front of you, again, it's important to raise, but you should be raising a little more to protect your hand. Now in late position, this is the best possible spot you could be in. You've already seen all the action in front of you, you're going to get to act last on every single street, which is a huge benefit in Texas Hold'em. Now again, with one of these hands, you should raise. So in all 3 situations, you should basically be raising with these hands. Since they're so good, you want to put more money in the pot. Now, with hands like King Jack offsuit or Queen 10 offsuit, those are both decent hands. The problem with those hands come into play when you flop top pair with a weak kicker. Let's say, for example, you had King Jack, which is what I like to call the rookie hand, and the flop comes King 4-5. Well, if you catch that king on the flop, you're going to be sucked into the river. And if somebody has a better kicker than you, ace king or king queen, you're just going to be losing a lot of money with that hand. Probably the trickiest hands to play are those pesky middle pairs. I'm talking about jacks, 10s, 9s, and even 8s really. Now, from early position, there's a couple ways you can approach it. Limping is sort of a cautious way to see what happens behind you, but generally, it goes along with my style. It would be to raise with these hands and try to sort of isolate and maybe play it against one opponent. Now, for middle position, it would depend on what happened ahead of you. If nobody's raised yet, well again, you'd play just like you would in early position, and you'd raise. However, if somebody's already raised in front of you, and you're looking down at 2 8s, I don't know. If the guy's raising from early position, chances are he's got a real good hand. With eights, I think I would just call there and see a flop. If you catch an 8, now we've got a real hand. From late position, if nobody's entered the pot yet, this is a perfect kind of hand you want to attack the blinds with by making a raise. However, again, if there's a raise in front of you, I just call. Now, if you're facing a raise and a re-raise, well, how can 2 8s or 2 9s be good? That's a time to save some money, throw it away, and don't find yourself in a bad spot with 8s up against a bigger pair like queens or kings. You need to be really careful when you're playing small pairs. In early position, I advise just limping in and trying to see the flop cheaply. Now, you could fold, and that's probably what the books would tell you to do. The other option would be to raise. And now I'd only recommend raising if you feel like you've got command of the table and that the blinds are really on the conservative side. Now for middle position, if nobody's entered the pot yet, lean towards raising and trying to attack the blinds. However, if there's already been some limpers, well then you can limp along as well and try to see a cheap flop. Now, if there's been a raise already, if it's a small raise, maybe you can see a flop and try to flop a set. Now from late position, this is ideal. If nobody's entered the pot, definitely you want to raise it up and attack the blinds. However, again, if there's been a small raise or some limpers, you can see a flop. There's nothing sweeter than calling with 2 4s against an early position raise who's got 2 aces and the flop coming queen 6 4. He bets it, you move all in, and he walks home with a story to tell. Suited connectors. Now we're getting into the fun stuff. If you play these hands correctly, you can win yourself a lot of money. From early position, with a short stack, you just got to throw it away. If you had a big stack though, you might be able to throw in a small raise for deceptive purposes. Now in middle position, if you're facing a raise, it depends how big the raise is in relation to your stack size. If the raise is too big, well, you just can't play. However, if nobody's played, you can come in with a raise and go after the blinds. In late position, now this is where it gets fun. If there's a couple limpers, you go ahead and limp right along. If everyone's folded around to you, again, you go and raise to attack the blinds. But here, if an early position player raises and you think they might have aces or kings, this is perfect if you have a hand like 5, 7, and diamond. He has aces, so what? If you hit your flop, you've got him right where you want him. Think about it. Say you flop it straight. He bets, you raise, he sticks it all in. You're like, sweet, I got the nuts straight. He's got a story to tell his buddies about how bad you play. So the bottom line with suited connectors is it's really all about implied odds. Think of it like fishing. You're throwing out the bait, and then really what you're trying to do is reel in a big sucker if you hit a good flop. Okay, well certainly the mathematics behind Hold'em are extremely important. You know, understanding pot odds, starting position, and all the other aspects of the game. But realistically, what it all boils down to is the way you read your opponents. What we're going to look at now are some of the various opponents you're going to face in the game. Playing against amateurs is where you're going to make the brunt of your money. I mean, these guys don't know what they're doing. They're playing all sorts of hands they shouldn't be playing, calling all kinds of bets they definitely shouldn't be calling. So the thing to think about when playing these amateurs is because they're calling stations, you don't want to bluff them. If you start bluffing amateurs, then you become an amateur, really. Now the rocks just play super tight. When you're up against a rock, they're always in there with a premium hand. And whenever they bet at you, they pretty much always got the nuts. So how do you defend against that? It's pretty easy, really. If a rock ever bets at you, just throw your hand away. You want to avoid marginal situations. Also, when it's a rock that's in the blind, you should go ahead and raise it up. The guy's never going to play unless he has the absolute nuts. Rocks do really well against amateurs, and they do well against maniacs. But as a pro, you can exploit a rock really easily. Now when you're up against a maniac, you really have to have your seatbelt on. I mean, these guys are nuts. They're always betting, raising, re-raising, bluffing, with all kinds of weird hands. So the way to defend against that is you really got to set traps for them. Let them bluff their money off and milk them all the way to the river. Set traps, that's the key. The problem is for a pro, maniacs can often be a thorn in your side. The maniacs do really poorly against the rocks and they do poorly against the amateurs, but they can often take a pro down. When you're up against a pro, you better bring your A game. Pros aren't easily predictable. They mix up their game really well. Sometimes they're bluffing, sometimes they're playing the nuts. They're always constantly changing gears at will. So why bother pick on a pro when you have other opportunities to beat up on the weak players? Stick to beating up on the amateurs and the rocks. The only time you should face off against a pro is when you've got a really strong hand yourself. Poker's all about getting the best of it. It's about making correct decisions and good bets. Let's take this coin, for example. The odds of it hitting heads or tails are 50-50. What if I told you I put up $300 to your $100 that it comes heads? Well, that seems like a good bet for you. Conversely, if I said I'll put up $300 but you have to put up $1,000, well, that doesn't seem like such a good bet for you anymore. In poker, pot odds are the exact same principle as flipping this coin. When it comes to pot odds, the first thing you need to think about is what price the pot is laying you. Let's look at an easy example. Let's say there's 500 in the pot already, and your opponent's bet 100. Well, count that up. There's 600 there. How much do you have to call? 100. So what are the odds? 6 to 1. Now, once you've figured out what price the pot is laying you, it's important to understand what the odds of you actually making your hand is. So let's look at an example. Let's say you had a flush draw and there's one card to come. Well, we know 6 cards, which leaves 44 remaining unseen cards. Well, there's 9 spades that could help you, meaning there's 9 good cards and 35 bad cards. So that right there is right around 4 to 1 odds. If the pot is laying you more than 4 to 1 odds, well then you're getting the right price. If the pot's only laying you, for example, 2 to 1 odds, well, then you'd have to throw it away. If you ask world champion Carlos Mortensen, he'll probably tell you, poker is all about the bluffing. Well, while bluffing is definitely an integral part of your overall strategy, that's not all there is to it. First of all, you gotta figure out, who do you bluff? Think about that for a second. How you can bluff an amateur? An amateur doesn't even know what he has, let alone he's gonna try to figure out what you've got now? How about the maniac? You don't wanna get involved with these guys. You trap maniacs, you don't try to bluff them. The guys you wanna bluff are the rocks, the weak and the timid. There's more than one way to bluff. You can try a desperate, stone-cold bluff on the river when you've got absolutely no hand. Or you can use a trick that the pros like to use, called the semi-bluff. Think about it for a second. Let's say you have 2 hearts in your hand. 2 hearts come out on the board, giving you a flush draw. Well, that's a pretty strong hand. You're going to call a bet, right? Why not bet yourself? This gives you 2 ways to win. If you bet and nobody calls, you win the pot right there. If you bet and somebody does call, oh well, now it's just time to hit your flush and win an even bigger pot. I see far too many rookies throwing out that desperation bet on the river thinking that's the only way they can win. But that's not how you bluff. You gotta set up a bluff early in the hand. It's like telling a story. You don't just throw a bet out on the river with no rhyme or reason. You're telling a lie, you gotta tell it right. You know why position is so important in Texas Hold'em? I'll tell you why. Bluffing. When you get to see what your opponents do before you have to act, you get so much more information that you can use against them. Think about it. Your opponent checks, he's either trapping you or he's got nothing. It's your job to figure out which one it is. This is no time to get cute. There's too many people in the pot to try bluffing wildly when there's so many people that could hit the flop. Yeah, when you're up against one guy, sure you can bluff, especially if he checks to you. But with 4 guys in a pot, come on, man. You can't bluff everybody. So why would you ever show a bluff? I'll tell you why. There's nothing sweeter than taking a pot off a guy with absolute rags and then showing it to him as he throws his hand in the muck. It'll send him on complete tilt for the rest of the session. And everybody else at the table, they'll get to see that you're willing to bluff, you might have the nuts, they'll never be able to figure you out. You know, it's funny. Sometimes the absolute correct strategy for no limit hold'em is the exact opposite of what the correct strategy would be in limit hold'em. Let's take a look at a few examples. Probably the biggest difference between no limit and limit hold'em is the way you approach playing on the flop. Now in limit hold'em, it's all about pound, pound, pound. Let's say, for example, you have ace-jack, and the flop comes jack 9-4. Well, in limit hold'em, you want to bet and raise and re-raise as much as possible. But if you're playing no limit hold'em, It's a little more tricky. You only got one pair. Sure, it's top pair, but if somebody else has a set, you could lose everything you have. So in no limit, you want to be more cautious and look to trap. In limit hold'em, when you get to the river, it's totally okay to stay aggressive. If you think you have the best hand, go ahead and bet one more time. What's the worst thing that can happen? You lose one more bet. Big deal. It's not the end of the world. But in no limit hold'em, it just might be. In no limit hold'em, even if you think you have the best hand sometimes, if a really scary card comes off and it might cost you your entire stack, sometimes it's better to just check and win what's already in the middle. Limit hold'em has often been described as a science, while no limit hold'em is often considered an art form. See, the problem with bluffing in limit hold'em is you just can't put enough pressure on your opponents with one stinking bet. However, in no limit hold'em, if you think your opponent's weak, you can bet it all if you want. Now that ought to scare them. In a live game, all you have to worry about is playing your hands right and maximizing your profit. But in a tournament, you often have to sacrifice value in order to survive. Tournament poker is more about survival and money management skills than it is getting full value on your hands. There are mixed theories on how to approach the early stages of a tournament. The best approach, though, is to take calculated risks and really go after those dead money players. There's more bad players in the early stages of the tournament, and if you don't get that dead money, one of the other top players will. The middle stages of a tournament are really tough. Your strategy depends on your table composition. If you're at a table with a bunch of weak and timid players, well then you be a maniac and start attacking them. However, if there's already a bunch of maniacs at your table, well then you need to be patient, sit back, and look to trap them. It's all about ebb and flow. Okay, now this is the stage that separates the men from the boys. What you want to do now is get super aggressive, especially against the wimpy players who aren't looking to play and just squeak into the money. The real champions at this stage live by a philosophy. It's real simple. In order to survive, you must be willing to die.